And probably what I'll start off with, George, is just sort of getting into your background, maybe early on in your life. What kind of gave you the inclination to play football ultimately? I mean, were you raised in a certain way? Did you have a certain mentality that your dad instilled in you? Was it just your genetics, your good looks? What is it that, where you start earliest in your career, you can think back, what was it that sort of was that inflection point?
Well, we'll start with what it was not. It wasn't good looks. Wasn't that one. Anyway, no, actually, my grandfather, my mother's side, he played football in college. And so when we'd go visit him, he probably innovated the sports book. He would have 10 different TVs. This is in the 90s. I was born in 73. So you can imagine at the age of 7, 1980, he had 4 or 5 different TVs going with football on all the time. They lived right across the street from a fellow named Jerry Collis, who was the head coach at Bakersfield City College. And so I was a water boy for them. So at the age of probably 7, my uncle would throw me into the shower, these grown men naked, right? And said, this is my nephews, leave them alone. So, I mean, it started out that way that I just gravitated towards it. And I've always been a rather rambunctious kid. I've had a lot of energy. It wasn't just football, I'll play anything.
Right.
It doesn't matter. So, and then, as I grew up in it, my uncle played football on my mom's side. On my dad's side, my dad was a wrestler actually in college at San Diego State, was a national champion in wrestling and then in heavyweights. And then the next year, my uncle, my mother's brother, won the same thing, and they didn't even know each other. So it's kind of funny how that one worked out. So I've always been kind of in an athletic family. My mother ran track, was a cheerleader. Then my grandfather went on to become a referee. So it's kind of just been in my, I don't know, I would say DNA, because I'd rather do sports related things or be outdoors and indoors any day of the week.
Right. So when did you first started playing organized football? I mean, so you had this exposure into the locker room and then among men and kind of that ethos that goes into all that. So when was your first sort of step onto the field from a football standpoint?
Well, I didn't step on the field first, which is kind of an interesting story. I stepped into the street, because back then we played in the street tackle.
Right.
That's going to sound uncommon to a lot of people these days, but that's what we did. The car was a touchdown. It was relatively organized, but I didn't start playing organized football until I was in high school, because I couldn't make the weight. I was too heavy. I was a short, fat kid. So, I kind of that kind of worked in my advantage as I got older, because, in sports, you got to use what God gave you. And I had leverage. And so, and especially in football, a lot of those sports, leverage is very important. So high school, I started my freshman year, sophomore year. I mean, all throughout high school. So I was a captain my senior year. So that was a great experience, because it helps you overcome a lot of insecurities that you have. You can kind of release them on the field and other things that may be going on. As a child growing up, everybody has their own insecurities, but to be able to go out and hit somebody, I mean, for me, that was, easy.
So I was listening to, I don't know what team it was on. Maybe it was the Steelers. One guy was talking about when he gets to the games, he loves it because it's the only time that it's legal to really hit somebody really hard, consistently, continually throughout the game.
Well,
Kind of
they cheer you.
addition.
They cheer you on for it. So yeah, it's not only that, but it's being on a team, because I mean teammates, and you draw from them, and however this conversation can get on leadership, but it's just being part of a team that you share in a common goal.
Right.
And no matter on off the field, once you get in between those lines, you cross the lines, we call it. I mean, you're on the same team.
Yeah.
Because other people, I mean, I wouldn't equate it to war, because people aren't shooting at you with live ammunition. But tell you one thing, a Tongan helmet, I don't know if you're familiar with the Tongan culture, but there's some big boys, and their heads are like missiles if you get hit by one of them. And I have, and so that. So you have to really come together and you function as a unit in order to accomplish what you set out to accomplish. So
it's been described, George, as a series of car wrecks, right? Football. I mean, you guys are hitting at such a speed and violence. It's like a car wreck every time you get hit, possibly.
Well, I mean, yeah, probably about 20 miles an hour, but you have one person running about 18 miles an hour, and another guy running about 18 miles an hour. So you got a 36-mile-an-hour car wreck on your hands every time. And that was before they changed the rules with you can't lead with your helmet and all that type of stuff. So,
right.
Yeah, you out of that pretty banged up.
Yeah. So where did you play your high school ball at?
I actually played at Palos Verdes High School.
Okay.
And so we were, it's kind of a more affluent area. So we were always kind of looked at as somebody that were soft. And we kind of, we were a bunch of kids whose parents, they were middle class at that time. It wasn't that expensive, but we had kids that would come from inner cities and play us, and we'd go play them, and they thought we were soft, and we kind of didn't like that chip on. So we had a chip on our shoulder. We wanted to be more physical than everybody else, and that's how we got to a CIF championship game, and we accomplished winning league championships, and so that's where I went to high school at.
Great place for sure. So what led you ultimately to go to USC and start playing as their fullback?
Well, my dad went to school. He would start out at San Diego State and then transferred into SC. And then he would take us to USC football games from a very young age. So I was kind of indoctrinated into the Trojan family from a young age. Because I remember sitting there at 8 years old and just praying to God that we would kick the field goal or block the field goal against UCLA. I felt the emotions of the game, which I haven't been able to replicate in anything else in my life, to be honest with you. And I'm sure you'll have other people that played, especially at the collegiate level. I didn't play at the pro level, but I had a lot of friends that have. And they said nothing compares to the collegiate level because of the camaraderie, especially in the past years, not now so much with the transfer portal and all the things where kids leave, but, the camaraderie and, the legacies and the traditions that you have there. It's just a different deal. And you're still at a pretty formidable age because you're between about 18 to 21, 22. So you're not jaded yet by the money. You're all broke running around. So you really band together as a team.
It's sort of a pure deal, right? You're playing for the purity of the game, the passion of the game versus the economics, the business. And with this transfer portal, it's really interesting how it's going to change the dynamic, I would imagine, of NCAA football, and sort of where people line up and where they end up. I know with Deion Sanders out of Colorado, man, he's got a unique opportunity to bring some serious talent in. But then what does that do to the culture that's been in the past of college football? It's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be different for sure.
It's going to be a lot different. And I'm not so concerned about the culture of the different schools, but what you have is the kids is more what I would have a concern about. Now, any kid that doesn't get the starting opportunity right away doesn't have to work through that issue, which is going to hamper their leadership skills going forward. Because now it's like, I don't like the coach has a bias against me, or work too hard. Now I can enter the portal and bam, I can go someplace else. So from that perspective, I really am actually sickened by that they let that happen, because it's doing a disservice to the kids that are playing the game. Right. And ultimately, because it just basically made the NCAA a lower level kind of feeder to the NFL, because you can get NIL deals. So some of these kids are making, a couple $100,000 a year, some even more. I don't know how much the kid from SC got for winning the Heisman or what his endorsements would look like. But, they're getting paid to play now. So, to a certain degree, you should, but I don't know about that excessive numbers that they're getting, and the transfers, I'm not for it all.
Right.
Here's the thing, Ben, when you go through the process, you have opportunities to pick what school you want to go to. Okay, I understand coaches get fired and coaches leave. You're picking a university and you're making a commitment. And to get up and leave, you're dishonoring the commitment that you made to the university and to the people there. It's very self-serving.
Boosters, George. You got people putting lots of money in these programs, supporting these programs as boosters of programs or of the colleges. How does it affect people's appetite to actually invest in these programs if people are just leaving? It puts tremendous pressure on the coach, the coaching staff, who they're bringing in, how they're developing the talent. I got to imagine there's going to be kind of a unique dynamic and a ripple effect with that.
Well, of course there is. The coaches are getting paid more than CEOs. A $10 million guaranteed contract over, you get a $100 million guaranteed contract. Can you go out in business and find me one of those, Ben?
Right. Hey, you're the recruiter. We'll talk about that in a second. That'd be a question for you.
Oh,
yeah.
So, and the thing is that, the coaches, they put in a lot of time, and I understand that, but their contracts are guaranteed for the most part. They have buyout clauses and all that. So, as far as the donors go, they just want to win.
So that's what
it boils down. Just win. We don't care how we get there. We don't really care. We've got money. And the schools that have money, they just want to win, and they'll go buy the best players they can get. They'll recruit the best players they can get now, and then you change coach, you change. Basically, the USC team this year is not the same team that was on the field last
Right.
year.
Yeah.
3-6. So I mean, half the players weren't even on the team last year. So that opens up a lot of different things on a lot of different levels that we could get into if you want. But it's the commitment, and I think the NCAA has, I don't know, made a few errors in terms of how they let this progress. But everybody's entitled to their own opinion.
Well,
I can only speak
USC
for
is an
myself.
example of why it's successful, right? Lincoln Riley comes over, brings a team from Oklahoma, and here you are on the verge of a national championship year one into it. And I think it's going to change from that perspective, the dynamic of how people approach it. To your point, they want to win now. And I think these transfer portals give you that option or opportunity even more so, right? Because you can get the talent, and as long as you have a good coach that can organize. I think what USC did was just phenomenal. That now, aside from the game with Utah, it was pretty impressive.
Well, no, I agree with you 100% on that. It's now the coaches become more of a coach and a general manager because they can go out and get their own players, if that makes sense. So from that perspective, it becomes a different thing. When I was back in the 90s and before all the portal opened, coaches that got fired, the new coach had about 3 to 4 years to turn around an organization because he's bringing in his players, his system of offense, defense. He's hiring his own coaches. Now you don't get that luxury. If you're bringing in a coach that's getting paid a lot of money, you better win year one.
Right.
Or there's going to be a lot of people barking at you.
Yeah. So let's go back to your career. Let's go back to that time and place. And you're at USC, you were the fullback. Talk to the audience about some of the lessons you learned in the adversity when you got in there. Things didn't always go the way you thought they would. What was a situation or example of an adverse situation that was really a challenge to overcome, but the lessons you learned from that overcoming of that challenge?
Well, I should probably say the first thing is the first play I was in, I missed the block, right? Because I wasn't really familiar. I wasn't confident. I was a deer in the headlights. The guy that was on the end I was supposed to block, his name was Willie McGinnis. He's got about 3 Super Bowl rings now. Blocked him quite a bit, but I missed an assignment. My first assignment I missed. And I've never been in a real film room before, because that's the one thing sports has to offer that business doesn't, in my opinion, is that right when you're done, Ben, the moment you're done, you take off your pads, you take a quick shower, and you eat, and you go into a film room. And so the first play that I've ever played, I missed a block. I missed an assignment. So I learned the playbook in and out because I did not want to not know where I was supposed to go, who I was supposed to block, or the different audibles that were called, because you're letting down your teammates. So, and then you're in a group of your peers. And so you're hearing it from your position coach. Mine was love him to death, but he was a Heisman Trophy winner. His name was Charles White.
Oh,
and
sure.
So Coach White laid into me pretty good about playing time. If you don't know your playbook, you're going to be riding the pine, and you better get a good pair of tweezers for your rear end. So I was pretty demoralized after that, but I was fortunate enough to have a roommate that I've known for quite some time. His name was Johnny Morton. He was an All-American. And he kind of really gave me the words of encouragement. He's like, hey, G, look, you know what? We're all making mistakes. You got to put it behind you and go out and kill it the next practice. And so, having a mentorship or somebody that's kind of been through adversity, and that's kind of what I was thinking about in terms of leadership. I don't want a leader that hasn't faced adversity before, because you don't know how they're going to react in it. So from that perspective, it's always good to have somebody that has more wisdom, that's gone through it before, on your side, that's supportive of you and that can pick you up. So that was my first adversity that I had. There were many more, but that one will always be in my mind, because the first time you remember things the most.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you're on the national stage, you're playing for USC. And it's funny, just last week, Andy Reid was asking or answering a question from a reporter regarding Patrick Mahomes and his 3 interceptions. And he said what you just said. He goes, listen, I tell him, you got to keep throwing the ball. The key is you got to learn from that experience, that mistake, and then move on. You can't live in the 3 interceptions world. You got to just move on and forget about the next play. So he's like, you learn something in the next play, forget it, move on, and keep firing.
Well, the thing is, the thing about sports too, and business and anything else in life, is what you think you become. So if you're thinking, oh, I missed that block, you better get over it super quick, especially in a contact sport, because the guy's coming the next time.
Yeah.
right? So you better be
Yeah.
ready to hit him. And so it's a matter of having a short-term memory. Okay, what did I learn from that mistake? Okay, I need to get over it quick, because if I hang on to it, or if I go down that thought process, it's going to derail your whole entire career. Because I've seen where that's actually happened to quite a few people in the sport I played.
Sure. So let me back up in that experience. How do you get yourself mentally in a place? I know you're with your peers. You want to show out and represent and be respected by your peers. But how do you mentally get into the initial part of a game? Because it's contact, it's force, it's brunt force. Obviously, a lot of hitting going on. So how do you get yourself mentally there in that place to, for that first initial contact and get into a game mode where that's really what you're playing is? I mean, firm grasp on the obvious, a contact sport, but is it a switch that flips that moves, or is it a pregame talk, or what is it for the team that gets them in that place mentally where they're just going to go hammer it out?
Well, I think for each person it's slightly different, but and I can only speak for myself. But I was always on the kickoff or the kickoff return team, so no matter what the first play was, I was going to hit somebody. So it wasn't offense or defense. You got time on the sidelines, because you don't want to overhype yourself, because you're out there 3 hours before a game. I mean, it's an all day event. I mean, you warm up, you got to put your pads on. I mean, there's a process that goes behind it, all that, to get to the game. So everybody prepares a little bit differently mentally. I mean, for me personally, I would just try to relax, because once I turned that switch on, I knew somebody's going to be running down trying to hit me. And I knew my responsibility was just to run, not away from him, but right into him. So that would be about a 45-mile-an-hour train wreck.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and if you're not mentally prepared for that type of contact, and if you haven't repetitively done it, I don't know many people that would want to do that right out of the gate. So it's a matter of training your mind and by doing something that you're because I wouldn't think anybody in their right mind would want to go do that, right? But the word courage is not being fearless. Courage is being fearful but doing it anyways.
Right.
So you got to have some courage to get out and do that. So, but once you can do it more than once and twice, you don't need your courage anymore, because you're not afraid of it anymore. You anticipate what's coming. You know what you need to do, and you and at least for me, I would watch film on the person that I was going to hit the first time. How did they run? What was their weakness in their gait? Were they tall? Were they short? What was my leverage that I had? So it's a matter about doing preparation. My coach said, and somebody else probably said too, prevents poor performance. So I'd always prepare mentally on who the people were that I was playing against, so that I was prepared to know going in how I was going to attack, because
Right.
it isn't a sport.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like that. And so if you look back in your career, what was the highlight of your time at USC playing football there? What was that play or game where you just look back and that was just top of the mountain experience?
Well, it wasn't really a play, I would say. It was going out for the first time playing at Notre Dame. And there's a big rivalry between them, and I grew up watching it. And I was on kickoff return, so it was the first play of the game. And I'm standing out there and I'm staring straight at touchdown Jesus that they have. And for the first time, I didn't want to look at it. I was just, I mean, the hair on my arms, legs were standing up. I mean, and they had the College Football Hall of Fame out there taking a 360 picture. So we're standing out there for like 3 extra minutes, and we're all talking trash across the field to each other. So, I mean, I remember that very distinctively, although they killed us. But probably one of the funniest things was I was on a punt return, and I took one of the Notre Dame players and threw him into the sideline. Coach Lou Holtz was on the side. And I don't know if you remember Coach Holtz too well,
Sure.
but you could hear him away, and he yelled at me, "You son of a blah, 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 blah. If you ever do that again, blah, 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 blah." I turned around and said, "You're not my coach." So I ran off, but I mean, that was kind of, now looking back at it, I was 19. I mean, I have a lot of respect for Coach Holtz. I mean, and they did destroy us that game, but that was probably a very memorable moment in my career.
That's awesome. So I know you're in the business now of recruiting talent to corporations in America. And then we had a conversation before this podcast, and you really had some interesting insights about how playing on a football team, how that parlays into business and business success, and some of the things you see and the companies you're recruiting for, the kind of talent you're trying to select and help them, recruit into the company. I just get curious. I'm just curious, as you sort of think and reflect back on your football career, as you came into the business you're in currently, what is the overlap with when you're looking for management talent in a business, whether it be a CEO, a VP, maybe a guy in R&D? What are some of the qualities you look for that really lines up the right candidate for the right organization? And let me preface this by saying, I saw a lady speaking the other day on I think it was CNBC, and she's talking. I'm trying to think of Huffington. I think her last name's Huffington. Anyways, she was talking about Elon Musk, who has multi-billion-dollar companies he's formed and started. And she's sort of complaining about the fact that he's not sensitive enough, he's not touchy-feely enough, and thinking about his employees enough. But on the other hand, he's very clear on what he's looking for, right? He's looking for hunter killers, tip of the spear, get shit done people, not messing around. And he recruits those people that are interested in that experience, just like playing football for USC. Hey, if you're going to do this, guess what? You're going to get hit. You're on a national stage. A lot of responsibility, a lot of expectations. And yet she's saying, well, and I got to thinking about that. It seems to me that it's okay for an organization to have their own ethos and culture. One isn't better than the other. It's just different. So when you think about how you're placing people, how does your football experience and that team element play into how you think about placing people?
Well, that's actually a great way of prefacing it, because the two go pretty much hand in hand. The first thing is, Ben, is it within an organization, you have to understand a culture, right? Like if you go to USC, for example, I mean, there's a lot of history and culture there and legacy and traditions, right? It's not like you're going, and I don't slight any lower level schools or any other schools, but there's a different level of expectation. So in terms of how I go about recruiting people, is it one, I need to know what the management's expectation is of the people they're looking for. That's number one. What's your expectation? What's your culture like? Because look, everybody can have the same looking resume and have the same skill sets, but culturally, do they fit? Right? Do they fit the Elon Musk type of organizations, or do they need to be an Ariana Huffington's organization? So it just there's a lot that goes into recruiting talent. And what talent do you have in place? Who does this person report to? I sure like to talk to him to see, because that's going to be his quarterback, right? So I want to see what type of person that person is looking for, and understand not only that, but who influences that person and what they've been influenced by. Because any good leader is influenced by somebody. Everyone's influenced by somebody. Currently I'm doing recruiting for a VP of social media influencer marketing. So these people go out and find influencers that influence people what to think, what to buy. So in terms of that, I want to know how that leader, who this person is going to report to, how they're going to interface with one another, if they have similar backgrounds, if they've been influenced in the same type of ways or slightly different, and how that chemistry is going to work out. Because at the end of the day, if you don't like who you're working with, it doesn't matter. They could get the job done, but I just found it over the course of my 25 years of doing this, is the people that have synergy, and I know that's kind of a cliche word, but they can work well with another and not necessarily agree on everything, but work together for the common good of the team, is probably the key element that I look for in anybody that I recruit to any organization. Are they officially a team player? And can you accept your role on that team?
No,
Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. That makes a lot of sense. And so when I think about I presume you're also recruiting for CEOs, VP level. If you're recruiting for CEO, is it you go to the board and then see what the board's thinking? Because the CEO can also drive a lot of the culture. So if they flip out a CEO, they bring a new guy in because maybe it's a turnaround opportunity, or maybe they need to restructure something in the business. How do you go about understanding the best fit for that organization if, in fact, the last CEO that was there was really the culture, and maybe they're trying to revamp it?
Well, that every situation, Ben, is unique. And that's where you have to spend some time to understand what they're trying to change and what happened with the old CEO and what they're looking to accomplish now. Because I like to keep my communication relatively simple in terms of what we're trying to achieve, in whether it be recruiting or whether it be a team, because essentially I am recruiting a team. So because if I bring in the head coach, he's going to be responsible for bringing in everybody else. So I want to understand organizationally in terms of changing if the we need to change the financials or if they're performing poorly, you have to get to the root cause of why you're performing or poorly. Why are you having culture issues? Is it really CEO? Is it something else? So getting to the bottom of that kind of helps me understand how to go about looking for the right individual.
That makes a lot of sense. So when you go out searching for the right individuals, how do you vet the individuals? I mean, because people come across with the resumes, they talk to you, and it can seem plus plus positive, but the reality is sometimes you don't know until they're in the pocket really doing the job what you really have on your hands. So how do you vet through people to make sure the person you're talking to is the real deal? What they represent is really the truth of who they are. How do you what's the process that you employ to get some
Well,
insight on some of these candidates?
it's pretty in depth, but I'll keep it relatively general in terms. I want to understand first of all what adversity they've had in their career or in their life right out of the gate. Look, everybody is tell me about your most memorable. Tell me about you. You start out the way I kind of start out my interviews. Tell me the biggest mistake or the most adversity you faced first, right? It's kind of exactly the same type of thing. I want to understand. Look, tell me where you didn't do so great, right? Because everybody wants to tell you about their successes, but there's at least from my perspective, and I can only speak for myself, is that whatever I succeeded, first I failed at, or I don't use the word fail anymore. What I learned from, because we're all going to make mistakes and continue to make mistakes over time, but the mistakes aren't really mistakes if you can use them productively. So if somebody go in depth and be open and honest about their adversity and speak to it about that way, then they're actually, and the buzzword these days is authentic. I view that as an authentic person that can talk that way about the adversity and say, hey, look, this is what I've had to overcome to get to this point. And if they kind of, dance around that subject, then it's kind of a red light for me. So that kind of vets out a lot of people really quick, in my opinion, especially if you're looking for someone that's going to be representing a fortune. Look, any company, doesn't matter how big or small, if they're going to be the leader of the company, you want to make sure that everything that they tell you is that they're honest about it, that they have integrity, and to see if they can handle something given any situation. Right. Because I also really look for people that are humble and have patience and that don't panic when things get a little bit rocky. That's the other thing is, I try to ask them some questions that would say around, what could cause them not adversity, but if you're faced with this problem, how would you react? Well, sometimes the best thing to do is not to react, but take a second, think about it. Right? Because I've been prone to be a very reactionary person that I've had to learn from because that's caused me a lot of mistakes that I've learned from. But to be able to sit back and look at the bigger picture of things and to be able to approach it in a more calm, assertive, dynamic way as opposed to just reactionary.
I have an analogy I'd use. At one point, I was in the Air Force in pilot training, and we were flying. And what they taught us to do, what's that?
T-37s, right?
Yeah. And what they teach you to do in the pilot training would be if something goes awry and you're by yourself, you always maintain aircraft control, analyze the situation, land as soon as conditions permit. And that was really drilled in you because what you don't want to do is ever panic because the outcome is going to be really bad regardless. So in those situations, it forces you to always maintain control because the outcome, the alternative is very clear what's going to happen. I mean, jets go very fast, things happen really fast. And that's probably the biggest difference between a prop and a jet. Things are happening at a much more rapid clip. So that in those situations, you really have to have your mind about you. So think of this, when you're first taking off, you lose your engine is a different experience than if you're 1,500 feet or 2,000 feet or 5,000 feet up above ground level, where depending on the jet you're flying in, your ejection seat could or could not be effective. So there's a lot of things you got to process. And in that moment, to your point, you really got to maintain complete control. I think in football, the same thing, you're on the edge of a play, you're trying to prevent in the red zone, a touchdown, the coverages, and sometimes you got to be in that moment. Things are happening so fast and it slows down, right? But it's a controlled sort of aggression, if you will, in football parlance. But I think in business, your point is well taken. You really, look, business is defined by just problem solving. All CEOs are there to do is solve problems. It's not like if you're Tesla and you're owning the EV market, there is no problems. There's just a plethora of problems. And so anybody going into business, it seems to me, that's really their job number one, no matter what their position is. So I think what you said really resonates, that calm, collected, under control is really the operative word. And so the next question I would have is, when you get these candidates that you're interviewing, is there a process you go through to make sure, you probably look at several candidates for a position. How do you weed through, if you're looking at five, and get them down to one or two that you would present to the management team?
Well, the more people I talk to, the better, Ben. I like to just put out a wide canvas just because I get different perspectives. Because I know enough to know after doing this business, I don't know everything. I know very little, right? I'm not an engineer, but I've recruited mechanical, chemical, electrical. I mean, you name it, metallurgical. So they're giving me knowledge that I don't have. And somebody that can teach me about chemical engineering in a way that I understand shows to me that they have the patience, they have certain things, certain intangibles that other people may not, when they just think that you know everything. And that's kind of what I think a good leader does as well. And that's kind of something that I do myself, is I listen to how well they teach me about what they do, right? Because they're going to go in an organization where they're going to have people reporting to them. So they need to be able to do the same thing. Okay, maybe they all have the same discipline in terms of, let's just use electrical engineering, for example. But this person's going to be running the group. So they're going to be able to have to teach something to somebody that that person may not know, but at the same time, be able to listen well enough to learn something from me. So it's kind of that give and take in terms of listening and the way they teach that helps me understand leadership is communication. If you can't have an effective communication with who you're working with, it's going to make things go astray really quickly.
Right.
A clear. So communicating clearly where you can understand what they're trying to get a point across, and there's no BS around it. To me, that's what I really look for in people that I present, because I want them to go and be no nonsense. What you see is what you're going to get. We all have our own unique personalities. So, whatever personality works out best, because typically what happens on my engagement, Ben, is, I'll probably go through at least 300, 400 people that I speak with. I say, here's the top 5. And then, there's other people that are good, but I think this would be whatever it is, culturally, you guys would work better together, whatever the nuances are around that. And I'll present the top 5. Like, we like all 5. We just don't know which one to pick. Mm-hmm. So then they have to go through their own process of, interview with the team, see with the team, and they come to a collaborative agreement on that. But I definitely say that the most important thing is finding the right person for the organization. That will go in and do the job, and that can communicate clearly, and that has no, as my dad used to say, shimmy in what they're saying. I mean, they're straightforward. There's no nonsense, and that, hey, this guy's going to go in there. You hire any of these, you're good.
Right. Strong bench and strong. It's sort of like a dream team sort of presentation to the company. And if you got 5 solid candidates across the board, that's sort of a high class problem. And certainly is good for your brand.
Here's the other thing too, Ben. It's just like you said, the brand is, anybody that I present is a reflection on who I am.
Right.
Because I'm
absolutely. So I reflect back on another conversation we had about what you learned playing on teams. And I think, in football, there is no greater accountability in a game situation. 2 minutes left, you're trying to drive the winning touchdown, or even throughout the game to make sure you're in the lead or you're trying to catch up. But there's tremendous accountability. There's tremendous leadership principles. When you look at some of the businesses that you've worked with, what are some of the deficits you've identified in some of these companies when it comes to leadership and how to organize teams of men and women to really execute effectively?
Like a good question. Let me look. It's some people are in leadership by default, if that makes sense. I mean, somehow they just started something and they really don't know what they're doing with it. Somehow they put it together, but it's extremely dysfunctional. And those types of companies tend to, be like a shooting star. Like, they're good for a little while, but then they eventually burn out. So the thing with that question is that a leadership, people that don't manage well, and I don't even like to use the word management. People that don't lead, that aren't on the front line, but are yelling at people what to do. They're in panic mode most of the time, over everything. They're not really calculated about what they're going to go about doing. They're not very strategic in their thought process, and they're not very communicated in terms of how they approach each individual employee or the people that report to them. Everybody's kind of handled differently, and there's no cohesiveness in how the team's managed, if that makes sense to you. I mean, I've seen it quite a bit where one function's managed completely different than another function. And then that creates inbreeding. It's like the offense is treated different than the defense and special teams. You're not one team. You're three separate entities. And that's the biggest thing that I've seen that's caused a lot of problems with companies that I've worked with in the past. And they think by changing one person, it's going to change the organization, when in fact, it's the leader that needs to be changed.
Right. I mean, what you bring up is interesting, because I call it the silo effect, right? You got sales, marketing, biz dev, you got R&D, you've got whatever that makes up the constituent parts of the organization, and everybody's vying for power, influence, budgets. Perhaps there's a number of people that are vying for the CEO role. And to me, the leader, the CEO that's selected, is vital in keeping things in a progressive fashion where they're all working together, unified whole. Where at the same time they feel there's opportunity in the company, right? If I'm there and I'm a fast burner because I have a vision of where I want to be in the organization, and if there's a reasonable shot at getting at that opportunity based on what we need to do or I need to do with my team, versus sort of this infighting, this Machiavellian, because I've seen that, right? This Machiavellian approach where I remember working with this guy. He was absolutely Machiavellian. He liked to stir up shit just to keep people off balance. And turns out things didn't work out so well for that company. But it was just a remarkable observation of really ineffective leadership. And there could be a lot of psychological dynamics why that was. But man, these are pivotal to the success of an organization. I think, not to be Pollyannic, but the idea of having different silos sort of integrated in a whole mission vision statement, and where they feel there's opportunities to grow and advance in the company financially from a career perspective, is sort of a challenging balance to sort of hit.
Well, I can make a good analogy around that with a quarterback and a CEO, right? Look, there's two types of quarterbacks. There's one that's, hey, the team's not going to make it without me, right? They're CEOs. The company's not going to make it without me, right? Then there's quarterbacks that say, hey, look, you're my guard, I need you. You're my center, I need you. You're my right guard, I need you. You're my tackles, you cover my blind spots. You're my fullback, you cover my A gap. I can't do this without you guys. We're in this together. I'll call the plays. I'll put us in the best situation for victory, but I can't do it if one of us fails.
Yeah, that's good.
Right?
Yeah.
That type of CEO says, hey, look, IT is not engineering. Sales and marketing isn't operations. They're not procurement. But look, you need that complete team, and you need the CEO, in my opinion, to go down to put the message out there, is that, look, I'm here just to call the play, but I can't, it's not going to get executed if we all don't do our jobs. It's that simple, Ben, to be honest with you. So, I mean, if the approach is, I'm the CEO, you guys aren't going to make it without me, then you're going to have a type of organization where everybody is fending for themselves. They're working on their own brand to promote themselves, because that's what the CEO is essentially doing by making those types of comments. Same thing with a quarterback. Not many people rally around a quarterback that has the I mentality. Like,
yeah, no, 100%. I that makes complete sense. So as you look back in your business, and as a recruiter identifying talent, what is one of the most profound lessons you've learned in this new career coming out of football, in trying to staff companies with talent?
You know what? Surround yourself by people that are better than you. I mean, a lot of people have, they may say that or not. I'm not really clear, but I mean, when you have a stellar team around you, like, God, all these people can do my job, we're in great shape. Right? You want people that are all just dynamic, and that are dynamic at their roles of what they're there to do. And everybody has a role to play on the team, and that they're better than you, right? Because I don't want to be surrounded by people that are less than me to make me feel better about myself. And in an organization, I think as a leader or as a CEO, you want to say, hey, I've got a deep bench. Because guess what? Somebody could go down, somebody could get recruited, and then you're going to have a whole different dynamic within your organization. But if you have great people around you that are building and mentoring other great people that can do what they can do and step into it, then you're going to have a robust organization that's going to stand the test of some time, because you're going to have a deep bench. If you have one great tackle and he gets hurt, guess what? And your second string tackle is no good. And next play, your quarterback gets knocked out of the game.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't happen fast per se in business, but it doesn't take much longer. Right. I mean, you remember the days when Jack and GE and they had the deepest bench that you could possibly imagine. I mean, there's people that were under Jack Wilson. They wanted somebody out of GE because of the way that they trained their employees and the bench that they had. And that's why they were so successful for so many years, and they're still relatively successful.
No, that's good. That's words of wisdom, and really profound to hear from you, because you're working right in the trenches with a lot of companies, seeing a lot of different scenarios, seeing a lot of different corporate structures, strategies, and then you're also trying to recruit people to fit in. So you have a really unique perspective that you're able to sort of see and sort of learn and grow from quite frankly. So as you look back on your career to this point in time, what's the one thing you'd walk away from if you're talking to this audience today? What's the one lesson you'd like to share with the audience that you've really learned in the football experience to what you're doing now? That would be a takeaway.
Well, for me personally, and it all stems from, I know from my faith, is that it's, for me, more gratification comes out of serving somebody else than having them serve me. And what I mean by that, it's if I pick up a block from my quarterback and he throws a winning touchdown, his name's in the paper, I got to serve him. Like, I got your back, pal, or whoever, Rob, or whoever it was, and not necessarily needing the publicity or anything, but just doing it out of servant mentality. Because I put some people in some organizations that, I do it because the other thing too with recruiting, that's kind of similar to a team too, Ben, is that you have a personal relationship with these people. At least I do. They're not just a commodity. I'm dealing with a human being here who has children, who has things, and you get to know these people very well. At least I do in the way that I go about recruiting. So I want to be able to put somebody in a position that's going to best help them with the information that I have on the organization and on what they can do. And so I've had people come back to me, George, you know what? You really helped me out by helping me through this process and helping them through the recruiting process. So a lot of people, they don't have the confidence to go through it, or they don't have, they have a lot of questions around it. So serving people is always more rewarding to me than having someone serve me. And I think by doing that, you'll succeed in life and in a lot of other areas of your life. And that's the one thing about our teams that I played on, is that we always were out to serve each other. And I think that organizations that kind of take that approach, I want to work harder for you than I want to work for myself. You're part of my team. I don't want to let a teammate down. That's the worst feeling, Ben, is when you let a teammate down, at least in the sports world.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. Service-centered leadership, I think, is really should be the focus. But then the next question that comes up is, the generations are changing. People in their 20s and 30s to 40s, there's a different perspective, different ethos. I know after coming through COVID, a lot of people maybe reassess their career, what they wanted to do, since they spent a lot of time at home. And so when you kind of juxtapose sort of a servant approach to the mindset today that you may be recruiting into companies, how does that line up? Do you see people still with that servant-centered mindset, or is it more of an egocentric, me first mindset coming into the workplace?
I think with the social media and everything that people have access to, whatever gets your attention is going to get your thoughts. So if you're looking at an Instagram, you do this, right? You're not thinking about anything. Everything is just so. But I see that as an opportunity, because I get to recruit, I don't want to call them kids, but young professionals at that age, that's kind of what they've grown up in. And I have the opportunity to tell them there's other things outside of that, and be able to, not to coach them, mentor them, but to suggest that there's a better way to go about doing certain things. And, because a lot of them I find they're transient in terms of relationships, in terms of jobs, I mean, back, if you have 3 months, 3 months, 3 months at different positions on your resume, I mean, normally, I mean, recruiters wouldn't look at that. Now that it's, fair game,
Kind of
right?
the norm.
But to
Yeah.
be able to, it's kind of like, but there's more important things to Ben than just your job, right? It's about your relationships with other people. And it's all not done via social media. It's having an interaction with somebody and being able to sit down and talk to them, and having, like we talked about earlier, about commitment and having those kind of fundamental things, because you won't get too far in your life if that's just the way that you're very transient in jobs and careers, because that's going to transition into everything else that you do in the course of your life. And as we probably both know, you have to have some endurance and discipline in order to get to where you're at in life, and you have to overcome adversity. So the first sign of adversity for some of these younger people in organizations, the millennials, I'll say, they're ready to jump. And I'll talk to them back, this probably isn't the best time for you to jump, or the best opportunity for you to jump at. If you sit where you're at, have a little bit of patience, you might see some things work out. Give it a month or two. Right. So I've had the opportunity to talk to a few people. I won't say a lot, but a few that actually, so that's okay. That's a good suggestion. And it actually really, really turned out well for them. So, it's being able to help where it looks like there's something that's, because they are the younger generation, because I'm 49. I mean, I'm open about that, but the younger generation is very, very transaction oriented in terms of thoughts and most things that they do. So to help them have a little consistency behind that, because anything that if you don't have consistency, whatever you're consistent at is what you'll become, essentially. So if you're consistently jumping around, you can jump around in relationships, you can jump around in your thinking, and it may or may not work out for you. But in my experience, it doesn't work out. So being able to impart a little bit of that wisdom in terms of what I do is something that, kind of goes back to the service thing. But to your point, yeah, it is a different generation. They do operate way differently. But in order to be a good leader, you have to know what people are up to and what they're doing, and get to know them and listen to them. And I think that's the big thing. Is, they just want to, if you listen to somebody and listen to hear what they're saying, then it has a greater impact. And, my question that I always like to ask is why. Because if you can get to the why somebody's doing something, why are you motivated to switch this job? Why is it that you're disgruntled here? Why is it? Then you're going to get to know a lot more about that person. And just the why question in and of itself has allowed me to get to know people. And, I just ask them 3 questions. Why? And they'll talk about it for 20 minutes. Each why question. So I got you on the phone for an hour. I know a lot about you. You get off the phone with George. Thank you. That was a great phone call. You know what? You're a really great guy. I'm like, well, I only asked you why.
You're a great conversationalist, right? Because you made it all about them. Of course, that's the generation. I mean, here's what's crazy is I think that if this generation has been raised on social media phones, it's very impersonal. So the idea of interpersonal skills has been sort of skewed and whacked out just by virtue of the technology. And so these people coming into organizations, working with people face to face with greater experience, right? Because, if you're in college, roughly you're the same age and experience. Nobody's married, nobody has kids. Then all of a sudden you graduate from college, you get out into this crazy mean world where you have people at every spectrum of life. They have kids, they're divorced, they're all this stuff. And now you're getting input from these people. And if you really haven't been steeped in, like, hey, when you're young, you're playing football, riding bikes, you're out with people. Nowadays, people are playing video games virtually, and that's their basically created world. So now you're recruiting some of these sort of mindsets, and yet you have the opportunity to speak in their lives and give them at least some kernels of insight and perspective. And you hope they take it up, because one of the things I always tell my kids and other people, look, you don't have to listen to me, but all these people that are driving by you in cars, they will speak into your life. Society will. There's a way it's constructed that if you don't play by the rules, it'll be bumpy for a while until you sort of figure out how the game's played.
Well, to that point, Ben, look, we have so much information at our hands these days. It's almost too much. And you have so many people that have so many varying opinions about everything that
Right.
there's no consistency. So if you're on your phone all day long or playing virtual video games and that's your life, or you have influencers like what I'm working on right now, that's a whole different thing. I mean, people influence your life. So whatever gets your attention, whether it's an Instagram post or because people get paid a lot of money to put those posts up there to have you click on it to buy their product. Whatever gets your attention, you're going to think about,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the more you think about it, that's eventually what you're going to become. So if you're thinking about what this person said, or that person said, or I follow this person, or I follow that person, I mean, I don't understand what's grounding you at your core or your core beliefs, right?
That goes back to what you said. They jump around a lot. That's the point. Is it's sort of like Dory in Finding Nemo. She saw that bright light. She's like, oh, gets distracted, and it's always the next bright light, the next sort of dopamine hit in your brain, which is what I think Instagram really represents, and perhaps TikTok.
Well, here's the thing I have to do better, right? When I'm interviewing, is it when I ask a question, right? You get a simple answer, but the way that their mind varies is the way that they scroll. Well, this, and then this, and then this. I'm like, I just listen to it till they exhaust themselves for a little bit because I'm not a big interrupter. I'll listen, right? But it's just this. I'm like, you have to focus on one thing, right? It's the spectrum of term of what's going on. You're not locked into anything. And that's kind of an issue in terms of putting somebody into a company, because that's what their brain's going to be like at work.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, I group people whose brains kind of go that route. Because I mean, at work you've got to be disciplined and focused, and you have a job to do. We used to say, I mean, and they still say it quite often in football, just do your job. I don't have to do the quarterback's job. I don't have to do the guard's job, the receiver's job, the defense job. I got to do my job. You do your job. So just getting your job done and focusing in on that, not being scattered in your thoughts, I think is something that I'm trying to steer the people that I'm out on, because I really won't recruit them to a company if they are that way. And look, I don't want to say all the millennials are that way, because there's a lot of really sharp people out there that are young, that are dynamic, and that are focused, and that do have a lot of, they're into that, but that's not what guides them. That's got to be at a low level priority for you if I'm going to recruit you. But they're very dynamic too, and because they do have so much information available to them that we didn't have in college. I mean, if I joke around with my friends, if we had these cell phones in college, we'd all be in jail with the cameras on them, right?
Right.
Yeah, right. So I mean, these kids can look up anything at any time, so they have a lot of knowledge and they're smart. But one thing that they lack, Ben, is wisdom, because
Right.
Knowledge and wisdom are two different things, as you know.
Well, it's
So
taking that information and practically applying it to what? I mean, you have a lot of information, and then what? And if there's no seasoned experience behind it, it's just information that maybe doesn't have a cohesive hold right now. It maybe in time it will, but no, I totally understand what you're saying. A lot of people come back with a lot of information, but it's not tied to something with called experience or wisdom, where you can actually apply it effectively on a mission, on a strategy, or whatever. And I've seen that time and time again. But in time, as they get more experience, they become very, very effective.
Well, and that's the thing too, is that I can kind of relate to younger generation, because I'm still like 2 years old at heart. Like I kind of, people joke around me like, man, sometimes we think you're 4 years old, but it's the ability to relate to other people, whatever level that they're at, in order to understand them, is how you can best serve them, right?
We talked about this last time, you recall, is I think about communication, even in this podcast. You can share something, I can share something, and it's only as good as the person receiving it based on their life experience, the prism they look at life, the bad times, the hard knocks, the good times. And depending on the age, if you're 20, what we're saying is going to be heard vastly different than when you're 40 or 60. And so that's a funny thing about communication, or even interviewing people for a job, is that their life experience will dictate the level at which they can actually receive the impact that you think you're having of what you're saying, because they don't have that full experience. Because you're going to say something based on all these inputs of like, oh no, this is really important, and here's why. And they'll hear it like, oh, that's interesting, okay, until they go through a time in life and enough experience, and then look back on what George said and like, oh, I get what he was saying. And for everybody, it's going to be something different, which is what's cool about this medium. And I can think I'm having what I've just articulated makes sense in my pea brain, but to other people it may make no sense or may just be gibberish.
No, it makes complete sense to me. That's why I try to relate to them at whatever level they're at. You know, even if they are a peer, they're still unique. Everybody's a unique person. I have not talked to the same people ever in my life. I wish I kept count, but it's got to be close to 1 million, if not more, in terms of what I've done for 25 years. And there's no two people alike. So I treat each person individually, and the more that I can get to know about them and what level they're at, because even though you and I are about the same age, we're in two completely different jobs. I mean, two completely different things. So I get experience from listening to you. It's experience and it's wisdom. Um, Talking to people that are a little bit younger, you can't hit them over the head with a big brick of wisdom because it's going to go way over their head. It's something that have after having listened to them, you can relate to them, so you can give them wisdom that's tied into what they relate to.
Yeah, well said. Absolutely. Yeah, that makes 100%
So when I
sense.
so I'm not trying to talk to them about raising money or something that's going to be whatever, right?
Right, right.
I want to talk to the video game they're playing and how I can reference that to something that could help them in their life down the road.
So, in football, so I was going to say in football, there's the team, there's the coach, there's the coaches for the different positions, and then there's the referees. And as you think about that analogy in business, and fairness, and some people get selected, some people don't. Where does a ref what role does a ref play in life? I mean, you got it in the football field, and that's sort of the person that sort of drives fairness of the game, to drive to an outcome. So what role would a referee play in a business sort of setting?
Oh, that's a great question, actually. Referees really, their object of the game is to let people play the game. It's only if something bad happens should they be involved in it, right? Or something that's controversial, you need to review it. I don't think a referee should be in business. Let people play the game and let them figure it out. Because if you have a referee in a corporation, all they're going to do is throw flags. No one's going to like them, number one, right? What's he going to do? Settle a dispute? I mean, that's not going to probably happen. I mean, because you have to have rules to follow in order to have a referee to enforce them. So unless your company has rules that are hard and fast, right, that aren't movable, that are written in a book, then you really don't need a referee to referee it. The CEO should be not a referee, but should be somebody that if there's an issue that can mediate and resolve the problem. Not that everyone needs to agree on it, because ultimately, if you watch a good coach, a team loses, the quarterback plays horrible, the head coach takes the responsibility. It's his fault, right? Nobody points fingers. If you got a CEO that's pointing fingers, I mean, that's a bad deal too. Or talking behind other people's backs instead of going to them directly. So in terms of your question, I don't think there's really a point for a referee to be in a business because everybody you're on the same team. So there isn't a foul, right?
But would the analogy be more like human resources as the referee when people feel, certain things aren't happening? There's certain issues, interpersonal issues going on in the business. I mean, to me, as I think about, running a company, HR becomes, as you get bigger, it's paramount to have a really strong HR. You're in California, a different set of rules than if you're in Nevada. And so
Right.
just my perspective would be, you got to have a really strong HR department because not everybody's going to be satisfied with an outcome, on who got promoted, with feeling slighted or maybe sexually harassed or whatever the issue may be. To me, that would be my sort of analogy of the referee. It's something that you can go that's impartial, that's applying the law from a human resources standpoint, because I think that's also tantamount to success for an organization. If there's things bubbling under the surface that aren't being dealt with on those levels, that's a pretty big ripple effect throughout the organization.
Well, I've worked with some really successful, strong HR organizations, Ben, and because I work hand in hand with HR, so I get what you say by being the referee. I mean, there's definitely, I mean, and that's the other thing too, is that there are labor laws that each company has to adhere to. I mean, that's just the way, that's part of doing business. So, I mean, that's, I guess, the enforcement of the law. like a referee. But the HR departments that I worked with, you want to get to a problem because before it becomes too great, right? So HR proactively is on the floor. They're working with employees. They're going around. They're not just enforcing rules, but they're being proactive so they don't have rules that they have to enforce, right? Which makes the organization a lot more seamless, run a lot more seamless. And look, for human beings, there's always going to be a problem. Somebody's always going to have an ego, pride, whatever may be driving whatever situation they bring to HR. But if you have a proactive HR group that's on the floor, talking to people and not just sitting, waiting for something to happen, I've seen a lot better results, not only in employee retention, but in profitability. Because look, you're only as employees at the end of the day. If they're dissatisfied, they'll come collect a paycheck and do their job just to get by while they're looking for something else. But if you have an engaged employees that know that the CEO is behind them, that know HR is there pressing them, feelings are going to get hurt in football too, Ben. I mean, not everybody gets to start, right? But it's role and patience. Everybody wants everything now. That's the one universal thing. I'm guilty of that too. And, that's something I'm working on myself. Be patient, right? It's the tough thing, but look, you'll get your turn when the time's right. But if you want to jump ship, that happens too.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking that, from an HR standpoint, I've seen situations where you really get some insane bosses. They're ego driven. They treat their people horribly. And now the people have recourse through HR to deal with that, right? Deal with that in a correct way, dealing with really an ogre for a boss or a person that shouldn't be in that position. You talked about that earlier, where sometimes people are at positions by default that was just the next man up, or maybe it's nepotism, maybe it's something, but they're not necessarily qualified to be a leader. And now they're in management positions with people they never really learned how to manage people. Maybe they're not a people person. And so to me, I think that's kind of my idea of a referee. And then the other part of, I think, football and sports that's really makes it worth watching is called the clock. If we didn't have a clock and people are slinging balls in the Super Bowl and there's never an outcome, nobody would watch it. So how important is goals, quarterly goals, annual goals to an organization, which to me, in my mind, is sort of that clock that people are on to really push towards the most extreme best outcome for a company a given year?
Well, Ben, I mean, if you don't have a goal, what are you aiming for, right? So, I'm 100% with setting goals. I mean, you have a goal. Okay, for example, we want to win the back then it was the Pac-10 championship, go to the Rose Bowl, right? And then we want to win the national championship. You have, let's say you have quarterly goals, right? Quarterly goals 3 months. I'd like to shorten that time frame because when we go in a camp, what are we doing today to get better, to get to our goal? So I like to have daily goals, because if you have a quarterly goal, I mean, that's kind of a broad range, but if you shorten it down, then you have things that you can hit every day, every week, and that keeps you motivated. As opposed to, okay, now I'm 4 weeks into the quarter and we're not looking so good. Then you go into the panic mode, right? So setting daily goals, weekly goals, however the organization wants to structure it to get to the quarterly goal. And then you have your yearly goal. So you go quarterly, till you get to the end. But in between there should be other goals that people are striving for to achieve. Because everything doesn't happen in a quarter, it happens day by day, right? And that's the thing that we really got, because repetition is another great thing to help us learn. You talked about being in the cockpit. I can ask you again right now, what happens when the engine goes out? What's your protocol?
Right.
Off the top of your head.
Sure.
How many times was it to you?
So again,
right?
What was that?
How many times was that repeated to you?
Oh, it's like one of the first things. You lose engines, and it depends on the altitude. What do you do? And so it's literally, in flying, you have a checklist for getting in the jet, starting it up, taxiing, taking the main runway, on takeoff, on ascent, on level off, on you name it. You have a checklist, and the reality is it's memorized. So when you're in those different phases of flight, you can reference your checklist, but it's all in your head, and you can it's rote. You just know it instantly. And you got to know it.
That's to my point, is that they repeatedly told you the same thing because that'll save your life.
Right.
It's kind of like the same thing in football. We repeat the same play over and over and over again. In business, it may seem like you're doing the same thing day by day by day by day, but that's going to get you to your quarterly goal, right? And then once you get in the repetition of doing that, because it takes 30 days to create a good habit, it takes 3 days to break it. I mean, that's been proven by, I forgot who referenced that, but I mean, that's the way it goes. So you get into a daily routine of, setting your own goals, right? And to have maybe something as an incentive, to have weekly goals, to have, or bi-weekly goals, something smaller that you work towards. Because look, first game of the season is on September 1st, right? You start camp August 15th. Well, every day we have something to work on to get better for that first game. Once that first game's over, first quarter's over, scratch it. It's over, right? You've got another quarter to go. You got the next game. What are you doing to prepare in that week? Because see, in football, you talked about time. The time is, as opposed to business, you're talking quarters. We're talking weeks to prepare for an opponent, right? And the whole season lasts only 3 months. And you really only have 3 weeks to prepare for your first game as a team, right? I mean, they'd probably change that now, but so the timing of it is condensed in sports. And I think business should condense it, not in terms of quarterly, but in terms of quarterly goals, but condense it to having bi-weekly goals, right? If that made because that's going to shorten down your time, like the time clock. Everybody says, oh, they got 2-minute drill. You know how many times we practice a 2-minute drill in football? How many timeouts do you got? How many TV timeouts do we got, right? Now we got to go 80 yards, get in field goal range. It's 2-minute drill, right? If you kind of run your business with those bi-weekly goals, you're running a 2-minute drill every time. So your likelihood of hitting your quarterly goals, I would bet, would be a lot higher than if you didn't have them.
Yeah, no, that's true. The other parallel I think in football to business is the change in strategy. So I remember when Kansas City played Cincinnati Bengals last year in the AFC Championship playoff, they were rolling. The Kansas City Chiefs were rolling into the first half. I mean, they were crushing it. And then they kind of pulled their foot off the accelerator, and then Cincinnati did a great job of just changing the strategy of the game, and they won the game. And I think what's cool about that in business, the best business I've seen is they'll get input, right? So it's plan, do, act, check. They'll make a plan, they execute on the plan, they check on the plan continually, and then they implement a new plan as the plan's either coming to life or not, right? So it's always a organic, living, dynamic process where you implement a strategy. That's great, but is it working practically? And if not, then you have to come up with maybe 3 other alternatives that you implement and try until you perfect it, which in the sense of football, it's just really compressed, right? You go into halftime and you know what the team that you're playing against, the tendencies are, the strategies to eliminate your strengths, if you will. And then you got to combat that and then come back out in the second half and execute on a game plan.
Well, from a football term, Ben, we used to have, and I think they still do, you have your first 15 offensive plays scripted. So regardless of what's going on, we're going to call these 15 plays, right? So that's what we're going to run the first 15 plays. After that, then we make adjustments. So you can kind of tell what you're saying now kind of relates to that. Like you have your plan, you have your intra plan, you're always checking on the plan, but you never know when you need to change the plan, right? So, the same thing that can apply to business. You have your first 15 call plays, and after that, you might have to change to combat. Maybe we're going through a recession. Maybe whatever you're trying to do in terms of product development, somebody else has got something out that's better. We have to rethink it, right? So got your 15 plays, but then everything is dynamic. I mean, I had a great 5-year plan in 2019, and then COVID came along, right? Yeah. So you always be able to make those types of adjustments in game, and in business, every day you're in the game.
That's for sure. That's for sure.
Game every day, because let me tell you something. There's nothing more powerful that's driven more things or more people than money or the dollar. So everybody's competing for market share and competing for money when it all boils down to it. So if you're not able to make those changes to adjust to counter what your opponent's doing, because even in business, I would look at two businesses that have similar types of technology, for example, and they're competitors. The word competitor, to me, means something different to the normal business person that hasn't played a sport, but you're there to win. You're competing, right? there's a rule book, there's referees, but you're there to win. So I want to go win. I don't like to lose. So that type of mentality is something that's inbred in sports, competition, and in business, it's used a lot less loosely. Oh, they are competitive. We'd like to look at that. What I would say, I would want to know what my competition is doing. Like I told you about kickoff return, I want to know all of their stats, everything they're going on. I want to beat them. I want to know everything about them. Right. So in terms about how business could approach becoming better, I mean, competitive intelligence, competing against them, and knowing that you're in a battle, right? You're in a competition.
Right.
I mean, you get better than anybody else in the business world. You're competing for money. You're competing for market share. You're competing. It's a competition to see who's going to have the better return to their investors.
Right. Pretty straightforward. So George, is there anything that is there any question I guess I haven't asked that you'd like to share with the audience? Anything that sort of comes to top of mind, like, you know, I really want to talk about something as we sort of conclude this podcast?
You know, but I would just say, you know, I'd like to just encourage people that, you know, in terms of whatever situation you are, don't panic, right? Find out what really is the most important thing to you, because look, life for me, you know, we all have different kind of things, but you know, it's very short. You don't realize that you have a significant loss or some severe adversity that goes on around you or through you, and then enjoy every day, no matter what happens, because you know it's not guaranteed. But go out and compete every day. I mean, because competition's fun if you do it in the right way, and if you do it with a servant attitude about it. Serve other people and compete, and that's really about it. I mean, I think you did a great job covering most everything as it relates to sports as well.
So George, how can people find or learn more about you? Find out, you know, your practice as not a headhunter, but basically someone who can help staff organizations with the best talent.
Well, probably the best thing to do would be go to my LinkedIn. It's just George Falactu on LinkedIn, and you can find me pretty quickly. And then I'm on that all the time, and all my contact information's on there. So that would be the best bet, because I really do enjoy recruiting people to organizations, because I like people. You know, I like the different dynamics and what my skill sets, you know, whatever those are, can help bring to an organization and the people that, you know, I can recruit. So I appreciate you having me on the show, Ben. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, George. Really enjoyed the conversation as well. And again, you have a lot of experience that is practical, that you can use the sports experience really in life and certainly in business. So thanks for your time today. Really enjoyed the conversation.
All right. Thanks, Ben. Talk to you soon.